I got the invitation to go on this Armed Lutheran radio show, though. You know this guy? Have you seen this? There's two things that I would like to say that make me feel safe. Number one, the fact that there is a radio show called the Armed Lutheran Podcast somewhere in the world. That makes me feel safe.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 490. We are 10 episodes away from the Big 5-0, or 500, or from our Big 500. I want to thank everybody for listening today. Those of you who are new, welcome aboard. Glad to have you with us. Better late than never. There are still 489 previous episodes for you to dig into if you haven't already. Hope you will do that, and I hope you will stick around and come back for more next week. For those of you who are returning, welcome back. Glad to have you with us again. As we count down towards episode 500. What are we doing this week? I don't know. It's not time to tell you. It's time to thank the members of the Reformation Gun Club, because this episode revolves around something that happened at our most recent online hangout. I want to thank all the members of the Reformation Gun Club, the people who make the show possible. Armed Lutheran Radio is listener funded. We have no advertising. We don't have any sponsors. We rely on the generosity of the good people who call themselves the Reformation Gun Club. Their annual, or in some cases monthly, contributions are greatly appreciated. They help us keep doing what we do. And if you would like to be one of them, help support the show and get invitations to our monthly online hangouts, visit reformationgunclub.com or go to the website armedlutheran.us and look for the Reformation Gun Club banner about midway down the page and click on the contribute button and come and join us. All of our contributions, all of the donations are handled through an excellent crowdfunding service, a Christian crowdfunding service called Give, Send, Go. So check that out. Sign up today. We would love to have you join us for our next online hangout, which gets us back around to what I was about to start talking about when I was jumping the gun, kind of excited about this topic, because this is a follow-up to our June online hangout, which was episode 488, which was an excellent, in-depth discussion of church security. One of our newest members, Troy, had brought this topic to discuss for the online hangout. It's an excellent discussion. Really glad to have all of the input from all the different members, and I really appreciate Troy bringing this topic up. In fact, I think it might have been Troy or another member, or maybe Troy and another member, who had reached out shortly after the sort of state of the show where we was trying to figure out what direction the show would go, who suggested that, this would be a great topic to focus on, the topic of threats to the church from a variety of different sources. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because, I don't want to rehash what we talked about in that discussion. I would encourage you to go back and listen or to watch the video on YouTube. Great input from all the members. But I wanted to kind of narrow the focus a little bit in two different ways. One thing, if you watched or listened, that you may have been struck by was a couple of the members, including Troy, whose congregations are, I'm just going to say, huge. I mean, it's a situation that I have never found myself in, a church with that many members and with that big a budget that they could have an outlay the size, a six-figure outlay for church security. And I think that's fantastic. It's not something that I've ever experienced or seen in my personal life. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Obviously, it does. But we had a couple of members, David as well, who mentioned whose church is very large. Lots of members, multiple services, a large campus, lots of worshipers on the regular on Sunday. How do you deal with that situation, and how do you secure those sorts of situations? What I wanted to do was sort of narrow that down or whittle that down a little bit to what is probably the most common situation, which is a smaller church, with a smaller budget. How do you secure your church? I started to say on the cheap, but that's not really it's probably not the best way to put it. How do you secure your church when you have limited funds, and when you have, which usually is a result of a smaller congregation, maybe a rural community where you just don't have hundreds of people in your community who are of like faith coming to your church every Sunday. Been in those situations many times where the church just doesn't have the membership and therefore the budget for lots of extras. In fact, coming from a situation very recently where I actually lost my church because we could not competitively pay what is an excellent pastor. And because of a shortage of pastors in the community and the difficulty with the call process, the decision was made to dissolve the church and to have the members and recommend another area church for the members to join. Before that, back in North Carolina, a large church in terms of the size of the facilities, but not a very large congregation, a very tight budget that unfortunately at times had to cut some corners that were not pleasant, to say the least. So how do you? So I've been in situations where you have a storefront church. I've been in situations where you've got a very small rural church like the one I grew up in, or a suburban church where you have a large building but a smaller congregation. How do you secure your church in that kind of situation? In a smaller, in a situation where the budget is restrictive, and the idea of paying for security or paying for expansive, camera systems or security systems and communication, all this stuff is difficult. So I wanted to focus on that today. But what I wanted, maybe in the next, over the coming few weeks, I want to discuss some of these ideas. But the one that I really wanted to focus on today, though, was the idea of planning. Because I think this is crucial. One of the things we talked about in the episode, the last online hangout, episode 488, was this idea of having a church security team. Think of this not as a formal, like, police force kind of thing or security force. Don't think Paul Blart, mall cop. I'm thinking we're talking ushers. We're talking members of the congregation who are willing to volunteer to serve in roles as ushers, as stewards, as the eyes and ears of your security system, human intelligence, keeping an eye out, making sure that everything is safe, and solving security and emergency issues as they arise. But on an average day, probably just watching the doors, greeting people, handing out bulletins, showing people to their seats, and that sort of thing. That's the most cost-effective way to provide for security, and the least restrictive when it comes to things like insurance, is to have an informal group of your members who are willing to take a part in securing the church and protecting your co-congregants, the worshipers that you worship with on Sunday. So one of the things that was discussed was there was a lot of discussion about training and preparation. And so we're going to assume that you've selected a group of elders, ushers, and others who are willing to volunteer to serve as an informal security team. So how do you get everybody on the same page? How do you make sure that everybody knows how to handle certain different situations? The key to that is training. And this means, it doesn't necessarily mean that all of you go together, however many there are, at the same time and go out and get pay for formal training. This could be sort of one of the things we brought up in the online hangout was sort of a teach the teacher sort of situation, where smaller groups of the security team, they get the training, and then they turn around and train everyone else, teach them what they learned. But also there is the importance of not just the formal training, but there is the sitting down together and making sure that everyone is on the same page. Discussion of what potential threats are, how to communicate, what the areas of vulnerability are, and that sort of thing. Making sure that everyone, you don't just say, okay, well, Bob, you're going to be joining us this week on the security team. You go to the front door and hand out bulletins. Well, that's all well and good, but if Bob doesn't know what to do in a difficult situation, then it doesn't really provide you a great deal of, I mean, it does provide you with security to some extent, but it would be better if everyone knew what to do in what situations, and so everyone is all on the same page. So this gets to something that I learned from watching videos, reading books, going to training myself. There's some excellent books that I can recommend if I can think what they're called. Grant Cunningham has an excellent book. But I've heard, for example, Rob Pincus talk about this, and this is the idea of training for the most likely threats, the most likely scenarios that you might face, that your security team might face. Focus on the things that are most likely. You only have a finite amount of time to train. You only have a finite amount of money, perhaps, to pay for training. It doesn't behoove you to train for the least likely thing, to spend a lot of time on the least likely things. And this is something that Grant Cunningham in his book, and I wish I could find it. My apologies to Grant Cunningham. I don't have the book. It just came to me, but I can't think of the title. I'll put it in the show notes. But one of the things that Cunningham's book talks about is making a list, sitting down and making a list of all the potential threats and dangers facing you, things that might happen, and before you even start to rank them as far as what's likely and what's not, just make a list of all the things that could be, make a list of everything that's possible. It's possible, for example, that someone in the congregation has a medical emergency. It's possible that someone shows up to protest at your church, like we saw in Minneapolis. It's possible that you have a drunk or disruptive person come to your church. It's possible that you face an active shooter situation. It's possible that a storm hits and there is the likelihood or possibility of a tornado or something like it damaging the church or hitting the church while you are in worship. All of those things are possible. But then once you've made that list, figure out which are the most likely. It's most likely that you might have a medical emergency in the congregation. It's less likely that you have an active shooter. That doesn't mean that you don't prepare for the active shooter. It just means you focus more time and attention on the things that are most likely. It's possible, for example, that Don Lemon shows up on the doorstep of the church to lead a protest against your pastor. It's probably not very likely, though, possible but not probable, that would happen, especially if you're not a big city church, especially if you're not in a big city dominated with a large contingent of Trump deranged liberals. If you're a country church in Texas or Iowa or even out in the country in Minnesota, it's probably not likely that Don Lemon leads a protest to your church. Unless, of course, your pastor happens to be known for inflammatory or controversial activities or statements or protests. If that's the case, that's something that you have to factor in. Maybe having a protest at your church is more likely. Is your church active in, say, prayer vigils or protests with regards to the pro-life movement or abolitionist movement? If that's the case, then the chance of a protest at your church is significantly higher. If you are in the suburb or inside the city limits of a blue city, Democrat-run city, the chances of facing protests or problems increase. Where is your church located? Is it in an inner city or is it out in the country? That would determine whether or not, or alter whether or not your church is likely to run into disruptive worshipers or drunks or homeless people, this sort of thing. So how do you handle each of those situations next? Once you've identified what all the possible problems are or possible issues are, then you whittle that down, or maybe you do a tier list, which is a popular thing apparently on YouTube. Create a tier list of threats to determine which are the most likely and which are the least, and then come up with plans for how do you deal with it. Who calls the police? Who calls who calls 911 when there is an issue? Which of the team is responsible for that? Which of the team is responsible for locking doors or making calls to alert other members of the security team? Who's in charge? Under what circumstances do you interrupt the worship service for the protection of the members? All of those sorts of things have to be planned out, and every member of your team has to be on the same page. So once you've identified what all the potential threats are, then you whittle it down to which ones are really possible. The best example of this sort of dichotomy or this sort of whittling down of potential threats was a speech a class that I saw given by Rob Pincus, who talked about how, your training time and your training budget, the money and that sort of thing are finite. So you want to focus on the most important the things with the greatest probability of happening, the things that are probable, not the things that are possible. So he drew a big circle on the whiteboard. This is all the things that are possible. Inside of that, here are the things that are probable, and inside of that, here are the things that are likely. You want to focus on the likely things first, and then work your way out. That doesn't mean you need to ignore the things that are possible. But my favorite thing from that discussion was where Mr. Pincus says, it's possible that this room that we're in right now is stormed by, ninjas clad in black, and we have to fight them off. But it's not very likely. So it might be fun to do training to deal with those kinds of situations, but it's not very realistic, because the likelihood that you face a team of masked assassins is probably very, 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 very low. It's never zero. The chance of ninjas attacking is never zero, but it's not a very high percentage. So focus on the things that are most likely. And these are not necessarily threats to your life from the perspective of self-defense. This could be you live in Tornado Alley, and it's that time of year when when tornado season comes around. Could be more likely that a storm damages the church and potentially injures members of the congregation than to have an active shooter, or to have a homeless person barge in during the service. So identifying all of the possibilities, possible emergencies, maybe threats is not the right word to use, possible emergencies, because having someone have a heart attack during the service, which I have seen happen, and we talked about in our online hangout, that is an emergency. It's not a threat. It's a threat to the person who has the heart attack, but it's not a threat to the church as a whole. So focusing on emergencies, and within the definition of emergency, obviously, are threats. So things like, what do we do if a storm hits? If there is a tornado coming, where do we get all of the members of the congregation? Where do they go? If you have an active shooter, what do you do in those situations? How do you react when there is someone fishy coming in through the narthex and they want to come worship, or they come in begging for money or for food? How do you handle protesters or disruptive worshipers? What do you do if you notice strange people sort of wandering around, looking in windows and casing the place? What do you do with beggars or active shooters or people who come in who are obviously mentally ill and belligerent? How do you handle all those different situations, and how do you keep everyone safe? Once you have identified what all the potential problems are, you can then narrow it down to the things that are not just potential, but are probable and then likely, and you can focus your training and your planning on those things. So that's the first thing I wanted to sort of discuss today. It's not going to be the big exhaustive discussion that we had in our online hangout, but I wanted to sort of chum the waters, get you thinking, prep you for, how to think about church security. It's more than just concealed carry. It's more than just the Second Amendment and gun rights. It's more than just do you have armed security and all of this. There are more threats and more potential emergencies that your congregation faces than just those that might require the use of a firearm. So I wanted to get you in mind thinking about that, because there are things that you can do in that planning, right? Sitting down and thinking about those potential issues, those potential emergencies, that doesn't cost you a penny. So sit down. You can sit down tomorrow. After hearing this, you can sit down with your security team, with your elders, with your pastor, with your ushers and stewards, and talk about these things tomorrow, and it won't cost you anything but the time that it takes to sit down and discuss it. You don't have to spend 6 figures to secure your church. You don't have to spend a lot of money and try to figure out how to shoehorn security expenses into your, or what probably is already a tight budget. There's a lot that you can do without spending any money. There are things that you can do without spending very much money, and we'll get into some of those things in a future episode. There are things that you can do tomorrow to start planning and preparing and thinking about potential, possible, likely threats or emergencies, I should say. You can do that tomorrow for no expense. It only will cost you the time that you devote to it. So I would encourage you, if this is a concern for you and your church, if you don't already have a plan, if you don't already have security figured out for your church, you can start talking about it, thinking about it tomorrow, and start making plans going forward for how do we deal with X, Y, and Z. Is X more likely than Y? Is Y more likely than Z? Is Z more likely than X? That's only you can make those decisions, but you can sit down tomorrow and start thinking about those things and start making plans. And it's all free of charge. All it costs is your time and the hot air that expels from your pie hole. That's it. So I hope you found this at least thought-provoking. I know this isn't like great, wisdom of the ages kind of stuff, but I hope it gets you thinking constructively about the security situation at your church. If you thought that maybe you couldn't afford to secure your church, or you hadn't really done any formal discussions or group discussions, maybe you have been thinking about it, maybe you and a buddy have been thinking about it, maybe you and your pastor, but you haven't actually done anything formal, maybe set up a get-together over lunch after church one Sunday for those who are interested, and just have everybody sit down and kick around some ideas and talk about things like this. What are the threats that are most likely or emergencies, I should say. I keep using threats. Like I said, it's not always threats. What are the most likely emergencies that your congregation might face? And start plotting those, making lists of what those are. Maybe you have some recent experience or not so recent experience with emergencies and problems. Make those lists. Start to prioritize which are the most important, and then you can start coming up with plans for how to address them. And that's what we're going to start talking about in a future episode. We're going to start talking about putting together security teams and communication and training and how to secure access points, inexpensive ways to provide, security tools, whether it's, walkie-talkies or some sort of communication devices, or whether it's cameras and those sorts of things. We'll try to find some inexpensive ways so that you can get started formulating a security plan for your church. So if you have any questions, if you have any suggestions or thoughts on the matter, I would love to hear from you. visit our website, armedlutheran.us, and send us a message. Leave a message on Facebook or on YouTube for this episode. Tell us what you think. Share your ideas. Leave us a question if you have something that you related to church security that you would like to hear us address. Love to hear from you. Until we get together for episode 491 next week, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback or a review on iTunes and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio.